Okay, so the Nikon Z9 or Z9 for my fellow Canadians, it's a big deal. It's a big camera. It's a big move forward, technically speaking. So you would think that when reviewing a camera like this, I would shoot the very thing the camera is made for, sports and journalism. Except for the fact that Nikon gave me a rather small window with this camera that happened to coincide with my vacation. So instead of football players, I got trees and rocks. Or instead of current events, you get a nice picture of my cottage. So why watch this review? Well, here's my pitch to you. If you want to know all the specs and performance features of this camera, well, I encourage you to watch our already recorded live stream with Chris Ogonek from Nikon. There's also a handful of great hands-on reviews on YouTube, and one I highly recommend would be the DP Review's comprehensive analysis of this camera. I will link to both of those videos in the description below. What I want to offer you today is more of a practical approach to this camera. It is a significant leap in design even when compared to the Z7. So those of you who are already Nikon shooters, there are some things you should probably know about this camera before you jump in. And that's what we're going to talk about today. The first thing that astonished me about this camera is that it has absolutely no mechanical shutter. I cannot tell you how nervous this makes me feel. Now, I get that it's an irrational fear, but it's just that I'm used to both the sound of the mechanical shutter to make me feel like a photographer, and I'm a little bit skeptical of a camera's rolling shutter. Now, the fake shutter sound is something I can definitely get used to. It's a far cry from the nice mechanical click, but I'm not going to die on this cross. The bigger issue for me is how the mechanical shutter protects you from rolling shutter. Every camera that I've used in full E-shutter mode will have some type of undesirable effect at some point. Now, I threw everything I had at this camera, multiple shutter speeds, multiple frame rates, and in absolutely no photo situation could I detect any rolling shutter whatsoever. And I'd say nearly the same for video, though there was one instance where the camera switches direction and the stabilized sensor appears to introduce some wobble. Now, if this was an 11 megapixel sensor, sure, but it's reading out 45.7 megapixels or 8K. Now, I don't know what kind of witchcraft Nikon is using, but if you're wondering why this camera costs $7,000 Canadian, this is a pretty good place to start. Now it's time to talk about my favorite topic, usability. This camera is an absolute beast, but it's also crazy light. And I'm not gonna lie, I did, however, feel somewhat intimidated with it in my hand. Nikon didn't skimp on giving the user options, but I admit my personal bias is always towards simpler cameras like Fujifilm. So using a camera like this can feel a little bit overwhelming. But listen, I'm not the audience for this camera. For those who are, you will very much appreciate all the bells and whistles on the Z9. Even in short time, I got quite used to it and was using nearly all the buttons and dials afforded to me. The menu follows a similar fate, but I've always liked the way Nikon lays out their menu, but woof, there are a lot of options here, and additionally, some of the things are hidden and require some digging out, like how N-Log is hidden underneath the codec settings and not the picture profiles. And there are other Easter eggs like this, which you will discover over time. Now, the way to manage this, like all cameras, is just to set your custom menu according to how you use the camera. But not all core features like focus speeds, for example, can be assigned to user menus, and I found this quite frustrating. The overall build and layout is great, albeit a bit busy, but necessarily so. The new 4-way articulating screen is fantastic for everyone, except for those who want to film themselves. If this seems like a misstep from Nikon, well, you might be right, but truthfully, vloggers are not the target market for this camera. For those who wish to film themselves with the camera, well, you can either use the Nikon app or a monitor, but more on video later. I always feel a bit obligated to discuss colors in camera reviews, and somewhat hesitantly so because you can make a nice image with any camera. But since I shoot with nearly every camera on a regular basis, I'm lucky enough to spot trends. And what I've seen from the Nikon is just absolutely exquisite skin tones. I believe Nikon delivers the most reliable skin tones out of any 35mm full-frame camera. The only camera I've seen with better skin tones is the Fujifilm GFX 100. Another point to mention is that I really like to manipulate my images. I push colors often to very weird places, and with my Sony, things can get ugly very fast. And I was amazed at how hard I could push the color grade on the Z9 JPEG image, and it didn't go south. The JPEG, of course, did handicap my dynamic range a bit, but it still delivered a lot of power. When it comes to autofocus, the Z9 takes a giant leap from the Z6 or Z7, and I believe it is now in line or better than that of Canon or Sony, which is to say, a great deal. Two main points here, the first being that they've added a new feature called 3D tracking, which is just fantastic at locking onto people, and when they're even very small in the frame. The second improvement is with face, animal, and vehicle detect. In every other camera, you have to choose a priority, but the Z9 can automatically switch between them. Moving over to video, the specs are certainly impressive. 8K 30p and 4K 120p video, all 10-bit internal. And for those who do want the very most out of this camera, Nikon will be releasing 8K 60p and RAW in 2022. Additionally, you can record ProRes HQ internal, which is a very awesome but slightly media-hungry delivery standard. If you want to take a deeper dive into the video of the Z9, then Jordan Drake from DP Review did a great standalone video, so I'm not really going to double up on what he's done. I encourage you to seek it out. Again, for me, I'm looking at usability. Picture quality wise, N-Log is very good, but note that there's going to be a specific LUT for the Z9, and as such, I've just graded it to taste without the LUT. I chose to shoot in 4K since it uses the 8K as an oversample to deliver a very nice, clean, crisp image. And 90% of users are likely going to be shooting 4K anyways. One thing I'm always looking out for is how handheld footage looks with mirrorless cameras. Jiggly footage is usually the hallmark of shooting on mirrorless or DSLRs, but less so with every passing year. The 5-axis sensor stabilization works very well in a static setting, but does introduce these sort of classic herky-jerky artifacts of all stabilized sensors. Nikon does offer 3 stabilization modes: off, normal, and sport. Sport will even out some of the herky-jerky movements, but not completely. Now, if I was walking with this camera, I would still very much put it on a gimbal. In conclusion, I want to start by saying that the design of this camera was a bit overwhelming to me at first, and I wasn't crazy about how many of those core menu features required deep dives into the menu. But listen, I'm not the audience for this camera. For sports and journalism, there are very few critiques, if any, of the Z9. It was only a few years ago that most of the rhetoric around Nikon and their mirrorless program was that they were a sinking ship, their hulls blasted very much by the likes of Sony, Canon, and Fujifilm. However, in very short time, Nikon has done some very impressive work to turn things around. In fact, I would say that in pretty much every way, we now have the most powerful and impressive mirrorless camera on the market. Best-in-class speed, autofocus, and image. If you want it, need it, and can afford it, it is an investment very well spent. And that is it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, please subscribe to this channel for more videos like this, and comment in the comments section down below because you know why. For me, for now, I'm out. Peace.